Hi, my name is Nitza Lowenstein, and thank you so much for joining me today. I'm a journalist, historian, and today we are going to talk about the golden age of Hollywood. Welcome to Hollywood Lens of Dreams, and I must reveal to you that I'm a movie buff. After covering so many international movie festivals, film festivals for radio, I became a movie buff, and today I'm asking you to join me for an exciting journey to rediscover the grand and glamour and glitz of the golden age of Hollywood and its legendary movie stars. Well, the classic golden age of Hollywood, we call it from 1915 to 1963, and we are going to actually find out the important milestones, and that's time of the studio era that created the icons, the movie stars, and it made them very famous and popular and very rich. It's called the golden age of Hollywood. Glittering gold, they made so much money. Now, the very first movie to be completed in Hollywood, not many people know, was The Count of Monte Cristo. It was in 1908, just before the start. Because why it's a major milestone? Because that is the first movie that was in Hollywood. Hollywood actually was an ideal place to produce movies. Filmmakers couldn't be sued there for infringing on motion picture film patent held by Thomas Edison, yes, the very famous Thomas Edison, who built the first film studio, and he had a patent on that. So they had to move west. And also the weather, warm, lovely, sunny weather, ideal for filming. Now, what started the Hollywood Golden Age? It started with the first major feature-length silent movie called Birth of a Nation. And it's depicting the Civil War epic, 2 hours, and it caused huge controversy. The star was lovely Lillian Gish, and they couldn't believe they made $10 million profit in such a short time, and it was restored 100 years later. And Birth of a Nation was a birth of the modern cinema. It had love, history, the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, racism, seen by millions. Movies before, there were movies before 1915s, before the Birth of a Nation, but they were short, uninspiring, poorly produced. And there was no acting, it wasn't edited. And suddenly, with this movie, it became an art form, and it brought the realization of the power of the movies. Remember, there was no television then. Being an Australian, I can't resist telling you that the first full-length movie actually was the story of the Kelly gang in 1906 that was filmed in Melbourne, Australia. But not much left of that film, but it's also been recognized by UNESCO as like the very full-length narrative feature film that came from Australia in 1906. But this is a side slide. Now, First World War came, and we're talking about the milestone of Hollywood, and Hollywood, of course, joined the war efforts because they wanted to make propaganda movies. There was no TV, and people could see on the screen the propaganda movies, and it meant a lot. And one of them was Charlie Chaplin. And by the way, I've got a whole talk about Charlie Chaplin. I think he was an absolute genius. And this is a silent comedy, shoulders arm, and it's wonderful. It's a comedy in France during the war. I won't tell you much, but it was a dream, actually. Now, we can't talk about Golden Age of Hollywood without mentioning the big 5 studios, the MGM, Paramount, Warner Brothers, RKO, and Fox Studios. And they always had their own theater chains. And I remember as a child, the anticipation before the movie started, when MGM movie started, and you see the lion roaring, and the movie starting. Now, the silent movie era, that is very, very important. It was started from 1895 to 1936. The stars were idolized by millions all over the world. Remember, there was no language barrier, and there were lots of popular stars. And the silent movies, there was no synchronized sound, no spoken dialogue, but they were far from silent. Films were accompanied with live music, from a single piano to large orchestras. And the lecturers also narrated the film. And then was big innovation. They had title cards. Later on, they replaced the lecturers, and actors emphasized the body language, and the facial expression was real acting. One silent movie hit was The Chic in 1921 with Rudolph Valentino. I want to tell you something. You ask people who is Rudolph Valentino, they wouldn't know, but they think that was an incredible lover, and he was the lover on the screen. And there was so much scandals about it. Hollywood scandals already started then. There were so many rumors about him, about his love affairs, that he was gay. And The Chic was a beautiful romantic drama, and he was a sex symbol in 1921. And was a mass funeral in New York when the poor chap died at the age of 31 from just an infection. And that was really, really sad. Now, next stage is the first all-color movie, Tall of the Sea, in 1922. If you know Madame Butterfly, it's the same story, but happening in China. But what's important in this movie, that scenes were shot under natural light with outdoors Technicolor cameras. And suddenly you can see color and sound. Sound effects was Don Juan, romantic adventure with John Barrymore. And people were queuing to see that movie. And they always also had the It Girl, the very first sex symbol, Clara Bow. She was a silent movie star, and I've got a whole talk about Marilyn Monroe, the biggest sex symbol of the century. And the gold rush. But we're going to take a break. As I said, I've got a whole presentation about Charlie Chaplin, but the sound era started with the jazz singer in 1927, and it was the very first feature-length movie with synchronized sound. And it was a sensation, immediate sensation, and people were queuing to watch. And welcome to the world 1928, Mickey Mouse, welcome to Hollywood, the first Disney cartoon with synchronized sound. And we are going to take a little break, and we are going to talk later on about the Oscars. What do we know about the Oscars, and the Hays Code, and what happened during the Great Depression. We'll come back, and why the golden age of Hollywood ended. We'll find out when and how. So enjoy a little break, and thank you for joining me.